So again, he's doing a lot of freelance work, but the whole time he's trying to dream up strips that he can sell to a syndicate. Now, Daniel, I know that you have worked in comics, like comic books, and modern comic books, but are you familiar with how like the whole syndicating thing works for newspapers and things like that?
Not properly. To me, it has always sounded vaguely like the mafia. And in my practical life, it boils down to like, okay, this website has Garfield, but this other website has like Nancy. So I do understand that there are warring territories.
Right, and so the idea of a syndicate is they package materials, and not just comics. Like you can also syndicate, advice columns, like Dear Abby and Ann Landers and things like that, and they sell them to all of the newspapers around the country. At the time, we're talking about the early '80s. There's way more newspapers than there are now, and so the idea is if you want to be a cartoonist, want to get on the funny pages, what you do is you come up with a strip and you shop it around to the syndicates. The syndicates would get thousands of submissions a year. But here's the thing. The comics pages had a limited real estate in papers, right? And so maybe one or two new strips get tried out in a year because you have the stalwarts like Peanuts and Garfield. And so what is the turnover, especially if you have things like we said, like Beetle Bailey that has gone on since World War II or the Korean War or something like that. There's not a great chance to break into the industry. Is it like comics is sort of different, right? Because there's so many established characters and things like that. Like people always need new storylines, right? So it's not quite as hard as one or two a year.
Yeah, I think that superhero comics are different in as far as the characters are these enduring institutions, but they're not necessarily locked to one creator or one creator team. Or,
Right.
in some cases, some of these are like literally like family businesses, like I want to say maybe Hagar the Horrible or High and Lois or,
Got passed on to the child of the
right. It
yeah.
always feels like a great nephew or something
Right.
is now doing Family Circus. So, yeah, and as we're saying, it is very much this routine dominated medium where the comfort and the repetitiveness is all very built in. So it's
Well, and,
not.
and that's part of the charm is like you're waking up in the morning. You don't necessarily want to be challenged. You want comfort food with your Cheerios, I guess.
Right, right. And it's hard to explain to somebody who maybe didn't grow up doing this, but it is so the placement of the strips is so consistent from day to day that when there was a new one, it was genuinely disruptive to your routine. It wasn't like Instagram or TikTok or something where variety is expected. It was like somebody broke into your house overnight and moved the furniture.
So if you are someone that aspires to get on these pages as a creator, you come up with a strip, you draw some panels. If a syndicate, first of all, you got to jump through the hoop of getting the syndicate to like it, right? And the syndicate will help you develop it. But even if you get a syndicate to say, hey, this is a good idea for a strip, Daniel, they still have to shop it around. And again, there's no guarantee that papers will buy it. And so it's this sort of threading the eye of a needle thing to just, get considered. And then the economics of it are kind of terrible because, at first maybe a few papers run your strip, but it could take years for you to build up to 30 or 100 or whatever. The whole time the syndicate is splitting those fees with you 50-50. And so, especially in the early years, if you're only in a few papers, like if you're making a couple $100 a week, you're doing very well. Like the vast majority of comics creators in the biography, the author said we're making less than $25,000 a year. If you become a Jim Davis and you create Garfield, or a Scott Adams creating Dilbert, and you're in thousands of papers, sure, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year just from the syndicate fees. But, and this is key for what we'll talk about later, the real money is then packaging those strips into books. But then B is the licensing, right? Is the calendars, the stuffed animals, the T-shirts, the toys. again, you can make a decent living just syndicating, but if you want to make real money, like apparently whatever the corporation is that Jim Davis has for Garfield,
Paws Incorporated.
Claws Incorporated.
Pause with a pause.
Yeah. Has done like $1 billion in its lifetime in sales and things like that. Anyway, this is still Bill Watterson's dream. He's hacking away at it, which go ahead and hit me up with rabbit hole fact number 5.
The first strip that he tries to shop around was Spaceman Spiff.
Literally, I believe, called Spaceman Spiff at this point. Now that makes sense because there's a long tradition of this sort of thing. The comics pages weren't always comedy. There were things like, going back to John Carter from Mars, Buck Rogers, Flash Gordon, that sort of stuff. Like even Orphan Annie was more of an adventure sort of thing, really.
Yeah, even Popeye was they called it the Thimble Theater because the idea was that it was an ongoing story that was small, hence Thimble Theater. He wasn't like a Bugs Bunny out of the gate. He was a supporting character in what was essentially a long, adventurous soap opera.
So the other reason this makes sense is this is the early 80s, so what's super hot right now is Star Wars and space stuff. So again, I was not able to uncover any examples of the strips. I don't know if they exist, but it sounds like this spaceman character was a sort of like a Han Solo rogue-like character. Apparently smoked a cigar. And it was like half adventure and half parody. And nobody really bites on it because they kind of want, anthropomorphic talking dogs and bears and tigers and stuff like that. So he also tries to strip with a groundhog and a frog. Another one called Critters that focused on bugs. One was called Doghouse, which followed a 20-year-old sort of like a slacker character. Like there were two of them. One was named Sam and one was Fester. And they're sort of like young kids that maybe aren't in college and aren't really doing anything with their life. But one of the characters, Sam, had a little brother named Marvin who had a stuffed tiger who was named Hobbes.
Off to the races.
A little bit, because what has to happen here is none of the syndicates bite on any of this stuff, right? And so they start to steer them in a way. They're like, strip down the characters and like maybe explore the idea. Again, I guess they're thinking of like the licensing and things like that. Yeah, maybe make Hobbes more important, right? And this is where apparently Watterson is starting to investigate the idea of, is Hobbes a stuffed animal or is he a real character? In a way, like, what is Snoopy? Like, right. Snoopy interacts with the humans, but does not talk to them, right? So, in a way, I think one of the genius things that Watterson hits on is this whole sort of amorphous concept of is the character that is the obvious stuffed animal character, to what degree is it part of the reality of the strip, or just in the imagination of some of the characters?